So, yesterday you did multiplying with complex numbers. Today it's solving with complex numbers. Well, what even is a complex number? Like 5 plus 3i? That's complex because it's got a what part and a what part? Yes. A real part and an imaginary part. Very good. Okay. Now, if I asked you to multiply it by 4i, that would be like what we did yesterday. Everybody just start with that. We'll just do a little review. The key moment isn't the multiplying, because you've multiplied things forever. It's the simplifying part. Mr. Keenan, can you tell me what little fact you have to know to be able to simplify these down?
That I squared is -1.
Perfect, that I squared is -1. So when you're simplifying it down, make sure you include that. Pause for a second, make sure everybody's doing this. After you multiplied this times this and this times this, you should have had 20i plus 12i squared. Explain why that's not good enough.
Because I squared equals -1.
And therefore, I should now have 20i minus 12. Explain why that technically is not good enough. Who knows what I'm talking about? Patel, what do you think is wrong with it?
You have to put like the actual number in front of the imaginary number.
So -12 plus 20i. Raise your hand if you had that one. Okay, good. So I know some of you are like, well, these are the same. They're close. And 1 year, I know that we marked off partial credit for not having it in the right order. In another year, we just agreed that it was okay if the kids forgot to reverse it. But you might as well just try to reverse it and make sure the real number's first. And there's no chance you lose partial credit on that. Okay, so what the heck is this solving with complex numbers? Well, here you go. If I ask you to solve this, you're going to end up with a complex number at the end. See, you're solving an equation just like normal. Wouldn't you agree we should probably start by subtracting 4 from both sides? If you're trying to get the x alone, yeah. Now I got it down to just x squared, and then I just got to get the squared off of there, and then you're going to square root, and that's when in the old days, you would have been able to just go, wait, I have a square root of a negative, so there's no answers. But now, you have to be smarter than that. Who all knew that it was 2i? Awesome. Who all knew that they're actually slightly wrong? Carter? What's the... Oh, you, okay, okay. There's always a little exception. What are you thinking? Okay, so this is an absolute value right here. I know you forgot, almost everybody anyway, forgot that. And that means there's two answers. X equals 2i and x equals -2i. Or you could say plus and minus 2i. Do you get that absolute values give you two answers? Whatever's positive, like here, what's underneath the scribble here could either be 2i or it could be -2i. And you'd still get the same answer. All right. That was, when I scribble out this, I could say either 2i could go there or -2i could go there. All right. Does this remind you of the quadratic formula at all? Plus and minus square root of. If we had done what's with the quadratic formula, it would have worked. I want to take time to think about that for a second. Would you agree there's a 1 in the front that you don't see? But what's b? Some people are like, well, you can't do that because there's no b. No, there's a b. It's just that the b is equal to 0. I want you to write that out, please. X squared, and put a 1 there just to make it really clear we're trying to find a, b, and c, plus 0x plus 4. And if you put that in the quadratic formula, it would have a plus and a minus in it, wouldn't it? That's why we have to have two answers for that. So I actually want to do that. Right now, x equals -b. In this case, what's that? 0. -0 is the same thing as 0, isn't it? Plus and minus square root. And that's all over 2a. And that's really 2. And you might be like, but the answers we have weren't divided by 2. You'll see. B squared minus 4AC goes in here. And B squared is really 0 squared. Minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 4. Oh, they have a square root of 16. Plus and minus the square root of negative 16. That's where the I came from. And if you can simplify this, you're going to get the same answer that we got a second ago. Plus and minus 4i all over 2. And of course, 4i divided by 2 gives you plus and minus 2i. I think the quadratic formula is cool, but it's got 16 parts. Do you get if you can factor it? You should. All right, then I'm going to really stretch you, and some of you aren't going to get this. I'm just trying to be real. This is going to go over some people's heads. But for the people that get it, you're going to like it because it makes these problems really easy and cool. All right, so back to our original problem was x squared plus 4 equals 0. What if you knew how to factor that? I think she just figured it out. Okay, so what if you knew how to factor that? You could factor it into 2 things. Now, some of you are like, well, it's easy to factor. It's just x plus 2 and x plus 2. No, it's not. Okay, so if you put x plus 2 and x minus 2, why isn't that the right answer in the first place? Like, can't you just factor that? No, because you'd end up with negative 4, not positive 4. So how could we put something in here so that we'd end up with an extra negative? What could I put into my factoring so that when I multiplied it out, it did actually come out to positive 4? Yes?
2 negatives.
You're getting your worm. Something that'll give us an extra negative.
I?
Yes. Watch. If I put an I here and an I here, now when I multiply it out, would you agree I get... Can we shut that door over there, please? Brady, would you get that? Carter, slide over. You should have more space anyways. Okay. So if I multiply this out now, I have x squared, and the outside and the inside still cancel, which is what I wanted. And then the lasts become negative 4i squared. Isn't it true that that's going to then simplify to plus 4? So moral of the story, I could have got my answers from factoring it. 2i and negative 2i. See? I said this is going to go over some people's heads. If I show you one more time, I think more kids will get it. X squared plus 16 equals 0. And normally we would say, you can't factor that. But I just showed you how you can factor that. Because if you can factor it, you should. It'll keep you from having to do all kinds of complicated square roots of negatives. Why isn't it just x plus 4 and x minus 4? Because that would make negative 16. By now, you've either got this or you don't. You can put an I here and here, which then when you multiply it out, this will become negative 16i squared, which turns back into positive 16. So then I can just get my answers are 4i and negative 4i, aka plus and minus 4i. So those of you that like this and want to factor it that way, you're going to get your answers way faster than the other kids, and that's awesome. But I know I warned you, some of you weren't going to be able to do it. So if you are one of those kids, then here's what you have to do. You go subtract 16 from both sides, and then you get x squared is equal to negative 16, and then you're going to square root both sides. Then you need to get absolute value of x equals 4i. And then that will lead you to your answers of x equals 4i and x equals negative 4i, aka plus and minus 4i. Either of those two methods is acceptable, but I think it's kind of cool to know how to factor something that most kids in the school can't factor by just throwing in an I. All right. Okay, so that's solving. Are we done? It gets more complicated. Everybody start with this one, the blue page. Now, can I factor that? That'd be really hard. It is a sum of two perfect squares. See, it's perfect square, and there's a plus. So you could actually factor this one. But if you didn't catch that, no, that was hard. This is a really hard one. It could be done, but let me just show you how you could do it the normal way. We're going to subtract 36 from both sides. We have x plus 2 quantity squared equals negative 36. And I know what they're going to do. Because 36 is a perfect square, they want me to square root this. And that cancels off. When you square root something, though, you got to bring in absolute values. And then you're going to get two answers. X plus 2 is equal to 6i. And x minus 2 is equal to 6. Oh, wait a minute. Negative 6i. X equals 6i minus 2. And x equals, all those two negatives will cancel. No, they won't. It's negative 6i minus 2. But somebody really smart might be able to go negative 2 plus and minus 6i. Could you have factored that from the very start? No, then you're getting smarter than your teacher, which is very possible. You could factor this from the very start and get those two answers. But it's going to be tough. I can kind of see how it would set up. You'd go like, well, I need 1 plus and I need 1 minus, for a difference of squares. And then if the square root of 36 is 6, but it wouldn't work with just a 6. You'd have to throw in an I. And then you'd have to think, well, what do I do for this? Well, what's the solution to that? The thing that makes that thing equal 0. Remember, we want it to equal 0, right? So negative 2. Now, I don't expect you to be able to factor that. But I do expect you to be able to get those answers like that. All right, I think we should do one more like that. You ready? X minus 3 quantity squared minus 25 is equal to 0. Solve. Wait, I'm wrong. Plus 25. Sorry. Solve. Hint. You're probably going to have to solve for x the normal way by subtracting something from both sides first. So there's two things right here that most kids would normally mess up on, but I think I've practiced it enough you can do it. This should be 5i instead of just no solution. And this should be absolute value of x minus 3. If you got through that and you get to the splits, then you're home free. It'll be easy from there. Okay, compare the kid next to you when they're done.
Did you finish? Did you get x minus 3 plus or minus 5i?
Notice me putting the real part first, the 3 plus 5i. And the 3 minus 5i. And then I could combine them and say it was 3 plus it and minus it plus and minus 5i. There is a fancy way to write your two answers, or you could just have written them separately like this. Raise your hand if you got them. Okay, all right, that's solving. Why is it called complex solving? Because you ended up with square root of a negative, and you couldn't just stop and say no solution. You had to actually get the answers with eyes. Yes?
Why do you have x minus 3 for both equations? Shouldn't it be x plus 3? And then
Nope, nope. So let's look back at this. I'm going to just remind you with a simpler absolute value problem. Well, let's say I just said absolute value of x equals 10. Then what's under here, you scribble it out and you say what's underneath here could either be plus or minus 10. Okay? So this stays the same. What's in here stays the same. And this is the one that you switch to plus and minus. Now, actually, you can switch the other one, but what you can't do is switch both of them. So I always teach it this way. Take that number and make it plus and minus. So take this number here and make it positive 5i and negative 5i. Okay. And this just stays the same in both spots, here and here. Okay. Let's go on to the page of the notes. This one, you'll have a negative. You'll be square rooting it, except now there's also a fraction. Let's see if you can do it. Hint, 16 times 3 is 48. I'm not saying that this is the answer to your problem. I'm saying at some point in this problem, you might need to know. Not many people know what 16 times 3 in their head. Brady, what's the first step?
I don't know.
Okay. I'm trying to solve this, trying to get x alone. I'll give you some options. Do you think we should square root both sides right now?
I don't know.
Okay. Then here's another choice. We could add 3 to both sides right now. Does that make sense to you?
No.
How about divide by negative 3 on both sides?
Yeah.
Yep. Start with that. Catherine, we divide by negative 3 on both sides. True or false?
True.
True. Do you guys see now why I told you 16 times 3 is 48? It's a subtle way of just telling you what that has to be then, right? What's that answer? Negative 16. Now is the time to get rid of the square root. Now, I want to ask for a second, why couldn't I just square root it in the first place? Here's why. PEMDAS, when you're solving an equation, always go back to when you're solving an equation, you should look to see if you can add or subtract anything first. The last thing you deal with is the stuff that's the exponents and the parentheses. See? Exponents and parentheses, they're last. So the first thing we needed to do was divide. There was no add or subtract we could do, but there was a multiply divide we could do. That's why we divided by -3 first. Now I'm going to square root both sides. And I know how to do that because I know the square root of -16 is 4i. And I know the square root of this is absolute value of x minus 2. That brings you to two things. X minus 2 is 4i. And x minus 2 is -4i. You've stopped writing. You need to write these. Unless you have this on your iPad. I have it. Brady, do you have this on your iPad? I didn't think so. You're drifting. You just weren't writing for like the last 5 minutes. And that's gonna mean you're gonna get really lost. Copy it up to here. Okay?
So you plus 2 on both of them.
All right, we're gonna add 2 to both of them. And now x equals, I'm gonna write it with the 2 first, because why? Because that's the real part. And Vaughn, what's the other one?
2 minus 4i.
Excellent. And can you combine them?
Yeah.
What do you get?
2 plus or minus 4i.
Yes. All right, now let's see who's got a short-term memory. Can you factor that? Because I can. Because I know how I works. If you can't, you'd have to do it the other way. As long as you have one of the 2 ways, but I personally think the factoring thing's kind of cool. If you factored it, then you've got the 2 answers right there in your factors. All right, if you can't factor it, that's cool. Just get the answers. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to compare it with the kid next to you. We're trying to solve for x, of course. All right, here's what I think is the cool, quick way. X plus something and x minus something, but I can't just say 100, because otherwise I'd get -100. So I got to say 10i. 10i. So then my answers are x equals plus and minus 10i. And you could have done it the other way and it'd be fine. All right, how many of you had that answer? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, good. So moving on to this. What in the world is that? Okay, this is just a dumb joke. Okay, irony. Iron is Fe. And it's just complex. I don't know. You have to be a total science nerd to enjoy that joke. So we have a worksheet. Would you please find the worksheet? Open it up. And I'll help you get the first one started. Fiona, please read me problem 1 of the worksheet.
X squared plus 1
A little louder, please. I'm old.
squared plus 1 equals 0.
Excellent. Could you factor that one if you wanted to? Yeah, if you get how this factoring thing works, that'd be slick. Can you do it, Fiona? Do it.
X plus 1, 5, and x minus 1,
You got it. Final answers then?
x plus minus
1i, and you can just say I. Cleans it up a little bit. There you go. Could you have done it with a quadratic formula? Yeah. Remember, the b would have been 0. You would have had to write it out as 1x squared plus 0b plus 1. And then you could use a quadratic formula, and you would have still got this. Could you also have subtracted 1 from both sides and said x squared equals -1 and then did it from there? Sure, you could have. You could have done that, and you need to know absolute values then for that kind. And you'd have I, and then you'd split it into 2 answers. But in all 3 ways, you'd get plus and minus I. All right. Problem number 2. Liam, would you read it to me, please?
X squared is equal to -9.
It feels pretty easy. Can I just square root both sides? Sure. Absolute value of x, don't forget that. 3i. 2 answers then. And I'm fine with you right here just going, I know there's two answers, but I'm just going to put them together. Plus and minus 3i. Boom. Carter.
Couldn't you also just move the 9?
That's what I was thinking. You add 9 to both sides and you get this, and then you can factor it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I like it. Shows you're extra comfortable with factoring. And so your answers are plus and minus 3i. Either way. Cool. Okay, you got some time. You got me here, willing to help you, begging to please let me help you. Okay, so please work on your worksheet. I need to see how big it is before I decide if I want to cut any out. Just as a show of good faith, I'm going to cut out number 7, just to give you a little tiny breaks. Cut off number 7, but otherwise, do those. If you need help, please come up and ask. And that's all I got for you for today.